Welcome to AP World History. This is Chapter 24. We're going to be looking at industrialization and imperialism, how those two things went together, and how the Europeans opened up a global market. What motivated the Europeans? Basically, wealth was the primary motivation. Certainly, national pride was part of this, competition with other Western powers. They saw the colonial lands as something to exploit to fill their pockets full of money. Initially, they're content with trade having a limited impact on the local population. As time goes on, they are going to set up governments in these colonies, and they're going to impose their will on folks in Africa, India, and Asia. To a lesser extent, Central and South America will, by 1830s, will have become independent for the European masters. In terms of what happened between 1450 and 1750, you can capitalize it this way. Spice was the most profitable trade. The expansion of trade was sort of gradual. There were some enclaves, small outposts in Asia, India, and Africa. Indirect rule. They were content to have the rulers in that particular area control the masses. They didn't have the manpower really to exercise great control over millions of people. And so they'll have little or no influence on the local culture. Now, there's a fundamental change that takes place in 1750. There's going to be more competition among the European powers for overseas possessions. And so they're going to go out and take control because they don't want somebody else to get it from them. The expansion of control of these areas is going to be quite rapid. The Europeans move inward to rule more of the country because they believe that that's more wealth attached to that. More direct rule, and the local leaders are going to be subordinate to the European powers. There is a feeling that the locals are inferior. It's somehow the white man's burden to improve the conditions and to show these backward people how to do things. There was a prevalent idea called social Darwinism at the time that said that, well, Europeans were more fit to rule, therefore they should. Survival of the fittest. They believed that they had a white man's burden, and they were going to bring their religion and their culture to these backward people. The 18th century presence in Europe were characterized mainly by trading companies, the Dutch East India Company, the British East India Company, and this is how they dealt with the locals. Profit was the main motive, territorial acquisition not so much. There was certainly a leeway in how to interact with the natives, that is, there was more accommodations. They tried to dress and sound and blend in to the culture rather than stand out. People in charge, certainly slow communication back to the home country, so the directors wielded a great deal of power. When we look at imperialism, certainly there's a traditional definition, and that is when one country dominates the politics and economic and social lives of others. Here it refers to the efforts of capitalistic states in the West. These are the European states wanting the raw materials. They're going to invest in the markets there, sell their goods to these colonials. Certainly opportunities outside the West. Again, it's purely dollar signs is the primary motive before 1750 and after. It's always going to be about the money. And as time goes on, certainly Great Britain is going to become the most powerful nation in the world and have the most colonial possessions. And there'll be others who will seize land in Africa and Southeast Asia and China, but never to the extent that the British do. In terms of economic wealth, coincides with national glory, political status, that is, how big do you want to get in the world, balance of power in politics, who is going to be the top dog. And the more overseas possessions you had, of course, it took a lot more manpower and wealth to control those, but it also increased your power and stature in the world community. So the change in motive is not so much trade, but domination. And we're going to see that as time progresses. Places on verge of collapse that the Europeans are going to be able to move into is India, the Mughal Empire. Remember, this was a Muslim, quite fractured. No real identity among the Indian people, and therefore many of them worked for the British and for the French as a way for social mobility. A place where economic interest was intense, certainly Latin America and the East Indies. Certainly a place of lacking in central authority, like the Philippines, and this will be dominated by Spain. Causes of imperialism, and we looked at this: European exploitation, direct control over the resources. Certainly there were revolutions in the colonies, created a need to exert force to control the territories. Religious competition. You have Islamic competition with the Hindus, Catholics, and Protestant competing with one another, and Hindus competing with Catholics and Protestant. So religious competition is going to play an important role. Economic competition, the European colonies was about the need to claim territory and to remain dominant in the world and have these markets ready-made overseas. Something called a safety valve, where people could go and settle and pay taxes to the mother country. Claiming the land, the Dutch and the British make their move. They're going to be the first to start acquiring more than just ports. The Dutch are going to be the first in the Dutch East Indies. Mataram is was paying tribute to the Dutch. There's going to be conflicts on Java between different princes. The prince are going to ask for help from the Dutch. The Dutch are going to back certain princes on the island, and eventually they're going to take over the island, and it will be their possession. So they're going to be the first. This is island of Java. Now remember that the Dutch were interested in spices coming out of this area. They wanted to have a monopoly on this. And so after a series of rivalries between different clans, chieftains, princes on the island, eventually the Dutch are going to take over the whole island of Java and call it their own colony. And then the folks living there will be subordinate to the Dutch. The British had a company called the British East India Company that set up some ports where they traded with the Indians. One of the main products that they were seeking was cotton, salt. They also were looking for jewels and those kinds of things, but cotton seemed to be the most important. The Mughal Empire was falling apart by the 18th century, and it was ripe for the pickings. And so not only are the British going to move in, but also the French, but the French will be defeated at several battles, and also the French and Indian War in the Americas, and eventually they will have to withdraw from India. Savoys were the troops that the British relied on, and the British will hire locals to administrate government and also to protect their interest in India. Here are pictures of the Indian Savoys. Um, Without them, Great Britain would have had to send quite a few more men, but by hiring these people, they could exercise control over the masses of the people in India. Certainly at the Battle of Plessy, Robert Clive is going to be successful, and he will be the ruler of Bengal in India. The French are going to be kicked out, and the British East India Company is going to be in control. Now, eventually, the British East India Company will be replaced by the British government. They'll feel that they're not doing quite what they were expected to do, and it'd be much better if the British government came in and controlled the politics and the economics of India. The Battle of Plessy, the British are successful, defeat the Mughals and the local princes, and then they'll, as you can see in this map, they will swallow up India and what is now Pakistan, Burma, Bangladesh, and so forth. They will set up what they call presidencies, a system of that ruled India. Bombay, Madras, and Calcutta are going to be the three important areas where they'll rule India. The Rajas were the local princes, and they were allowed to remain as rulers, but were controlled by the British. By the 19th century, India became a British premier possession. Rebellions were minimal. No real sense of national identity there. And there was no specific allegiance to a particular group at this time. Now, this will change later on in the 20th century, but not at this time. India became a major point of control for the British, who were seeking control of Asia. And as remember, the Opium War, they got the heroin, the opium, from India and shipped that to China. But the main product they like coming out of India is cotton, and they send that to Great Britain to be processed. This shows how the world was divided at this time in terms of the imperialistic nations, from Belgium, the British, Spain, the Dutch, the Germans. And so if you look at there, a lot of the world has been carved up, particularly Africa. Has been divided up among the European powers. The United States never held any possessions in Africa. India, eventually they will take over the Philippines, but this will be at the end of the 19th century. We're going to stop here and pick this up next time, and we'll continue talking about imperialism and changes in the industrial world.